Okay, we're going to expand our understanding of flow in a few different ways. We're going to show how you can have branching decisions, but we're also going to show how you can launch flows from a button on a record page. So why don't we start with that? So I want to run this flow um, that sends these emails to the contacts. So if I'm on the Boyle family page, I can see the contacts here, and I want to be able to send a flow. Now, if I'm a system administrator, I can go to the setup menu like I've been doing in my demos. I can go find the flow, I can go hit the run button there. But most users aren't going to have access to that and don't want to have access to that. Your average user is going to be looking at this page, and they may want to do that email send right from here. And what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to add a button here that launches the flow we've been working on. Okay, so I'm going to create the flow that I am going to launch with the button. And just like last time, I'm going to save it as a new flow. And we'll call this lesson 1D, launching flows from buttons and using decisions. Now I'm going to do something else here because I want this to be launched by a user who's using Salesforce. I want to give them some visual feedback. I want to give them a little screen, give them a chance to confirm that they want to send the email. So I'm going to need to make this a screen flow instead of an auto-launched flow. And that change happens right here. Okay, so I'm going to bring the screen out. Doesn't really matter where I drop it. And I'm going to give this a screen called the confirmation screen. Okay, so now for some text, I'm going to go to my display text. You just have to give it a name. It doesn't really matter. We're not really going to be doing anything with it. But here, let's paste in this text. Click next to send emails. Otherwise, just close the window without clicking next. All right, and let's delete that connector and start off with our screen. Okay, so we're looking good here. Now I'm going to test it out by running it here. It's not actually going to pop up in a window, but you can see that if I click next, it's going to continue processing and send all the emails. And if I just close this window, it won't send all the emails. So it's going to get the job. It's getting the job done. All right. So now I have my modified flow, and I want to make this available on the account record page. So let's go. The first thing I have to do is I have to activate it. Otherwise, it's not going to show up. So that essentially deploys it. It says it's ready for use. You can run it, but you can also put it on things like the account page. So now let's go and look at that account page. And here it is. So we want a button like this. To create that, I'm going to go to Edit Object. There are two ways that you can create a button that launches a flow, and they both, in Lightning, they both get activated from here from the buttons, links, and actions. We can create a button and have this button launch a flow, but this is kind of an old-fashioned way of doing things. It forces you to specify a URL and you have to know what the right URL is to launch a flow, not generally what we use or recommend, but that's one way you can do it. And it's the only way that you can launch a flow and pass in custom input parameters. We're going to use the newer quick action approach though. We're going to go here, and that allows us to basically just pick the flow from a list. And here is our flow, Lesson 1D, launching flows from buttons and using decisions. And for the label, let's call it send emails to contacts. And now what we need to do is actually add it as a button. So we're going to go to the page layout where we want it to be added. And we're going to go down here to Lightning Actions. And here it is, send emails to contacts. So I'm going to take this and put it right next to order cake and save. And so now we, if we refresh the page, there's the button. And when I click on the button, it runs the flow. And you can see that I can close this or I can click next. Now, the thing is, though, is that while this works, if we click next here, it sends the emails off. And if we go back here, we can see that here is a new batch of emails coming in right here to the one, we actually sent 3 out, but only 1 was pointed at my test email inbox. So that's all well and good, but we got a problem. If we go to a different account, we're going to see this button again. If we send the button here, we want the emails to get sent to Camlish. But if we click on it, the emails don't get sent to Camlish. They get sent right here again to the Boyle family. So even though we're on money market, savings bank, they're sent to the Boyle family. So the reason for this is a typical problem with when you modify a flow or you added some functionality to it. You may, if you've been watching these tutorials, you will recall me warning about the bad practice I was using with a hard-coded account ID. So if we go back here, you can see that sure enough, we're basically pulling the Boyle family's contacts because of this hard-coded account ID for the Boyle family, even though we're not necessarily on the Boyle family page. So we got to get rid of this. We got to get rid of this, and we have to have some way to make sure that whatever page we're on, whether it's the Boyle family or whether it's any one of any number of other accounts, we want to send to the right one. So if we click the button here, and we're on Money Market Savings Bank, we want this to be the record ID that goes in. This one that goes ends in FIAR instead of this one that ends in YIAR. All right, so how do we do that? Well, it turns out that most of the places where you can launch a flow, including these account pages, will pass the record ID to the flow, because it's a very, very useful construct. It's been made largely automatic. So this is going to get passed into the flow, and we just need to make sure that our flow is expecting it. Very, very important concept. The concept of flows can only work with the inputs that they expect to receive. So we want to create a storage variable and set that storage variable up to receive the record ID when the flow is run. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create this, and it turns out that there is a standard pattern in Salesforce, which is that the record ID is always passed in with the name record ID. So if we create this variable called record ID in the flow, and we say, hey, expect text, and then we click here, notice that now where we need to use this, we need to say that this is going to be available on sort of the outer surface of the flow, waiting for incoming record IDs. So it's kind of like it has a window. It has a breach in the perimeter. It can go out and catch a record ID if one comes in. Okay, so I have created this record ID. This is a very difficult concept. It's because it's very non-intuitive. You got to remember that when you're passing in stuff like record IDs, you have to create storage variables and set them up to catch the incoming parameters. So now what I can do, I can go here, and instead of using this hard-coded variable, I'm going to use that, there it is, record ID value right there. So now, and I'm going to save this as a new version. Notice that the save button's grayed out. Why is it grayed out? It was never grayed out before. Well, remember we activated this flow. We activated it. That was sort of like putting it into operation, setting sail with it, deploying it into the main ranks of the org. And once you do that to a flow, we take certain precautions. Flow takes certain precautions to make sure that activated flows don't get stepped on. They don't get stomped. They don't get deleted. So you can't just save changes to an active flow. But what you can do is you can create a new version, because that activated version is version 1. But if we do this and say save as a new version, we now have version 2. So version 1 is out there getting the job done, potentially being used by other users. Who knows? They may not realize we're making these changes. They may not want us to make these changes. That's okay. And you can see, if we go back and look at this flow here, you can see that we now have 2 versions. So we have the active version 1, which we can deactivate anytime we want to take it out of full operation, and we have this inactive version 2. And when I activate version 2, it's going to deactivate version 1. You can only have one version active at a time. And so now version 2 is the active version. Let's go back in there. All right, so, and if we look at Camlesh, you can see that we don't have any values at all for this. We'll make his vote for Kodiak Cody. So that will tell us, it will help us verify that the right email is being sent. All right, so now we've got our flow. We've modified it. It's using the passed in record ID. Let's go and try and run it. I'm going to hit reload on this. Salesforce caches a lot of data locally. So if you're not seeing the behavior you want, and you've just made changes to some flows, then make sure to refresh sort of whatever page you're using to load that flow. Okay, so let's try this out. We're going to go over here to Money Market Savings Bank, and we're going to click Send Email to Contacts. And we're going to go over here, and here's the latest email that's just come in, and you can see that sure enough it's the Kodiak Cody. So Camlesh's data is being sent as expected. And if we go back over here to Boyle family, we can click here, and there's the new email for the contact on the Boyle family. So we're successfully pulling in the ID of the page, sending it through the button to the flow. The flow is then using that ID to pull in the right contacts. Then we're looping through those, and we're sending an email. Okay, so let's say that we have the button on every single one of these account pages now because they're all sharing the same layout. But maybe we don't want emails to be sent by salespeople using this way all the time. Perhaps we only want some accounts to get the emails. Well, let's go in here, and you can see I'm just going to pick this industry field. So we've got this industry field. It could be any field. I'm going to pick industry. And the industry is agriculture for money market savings bank. And if we go over to the Boyle family, the industry is none. So let's say that we only want to to generate these emails to non-industrial sources. So if an industry has been selected here, we don't want the email to be sent. So that means that we have to make a, the flow has to make a decision. Each time it's run, it has to decide, is this particular account an industry or non-industry account? And to do that, it's going to have to look at that industry field. Now, we don't actually have access to that industry field yet, right? If you'll remember, what this retrieval is doing is it's getting contacts. And if we look here, you can see that there's a lot of stuff here, but there's no industry because these are just contacts. So what we need to do is we need to also pull in the account as well as the contacts. So let's add another get record here. And then let's say we call this retrieve account. Now you might be thinking, well, why do we need to retrieve the account? We have all the account information right here. Why can't this just be passed into the flow? And the answer is not worth going into here right now, but suffice to say, it doesn't really work that way. So we can pass in the ID of the account, but once it's in the flow, we have to pull the data in, sort of formally grab it this way. So we're going to basically say load the account where the ID equals, and then we're going to select the record ID. So this is going to pull in the record ID. We're only going to pull in a single record. Let's store that. I'm going to use the other approach. I could do what we did in a previous tutorial. I could define a record variable, a temporary storage variable of type account, and store the entire account there. But all I need is that industry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in separate variables, and the only thing I'm going to grab is the industry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the industry, and that is right here. And it's pulling in the account fields here because we specified the account object up here. So we're going to take this industry and we're going to stick it into a temporary storage variable, but instead of creating an entire account variable, we're going to create a text variable. It's a simpler beast, and we're going to call that cur industry. So now we're going to select cur industry, and that will store the value of the account that we retrieve, of its industry value. Okay, so we have that, and let's now when I'm thinking this through, we want to have this decision. Maybe I didn't put that in the right place, because if it's not going to send emails because it's an industry account, then I kind of don't want to show this confirmation screen. I kind of want to show a different screen. Let's call this emails are only for retail customers. Okay, and let's do a similar thing that we did before. Let's say here, we'll call this display text variable 2. It will say, okay, so now I've got these two situations. And now, so now what we have to do is we have to get this decision working. So I'm actually going to take this retrieval and I'm going to put this right up at the beginning so that we can decision based on that account information. So a decision looks like this, and we're going to basically call this filter out industrial accounts. And I'm going to give it a description. And once again, highly recommend that you add description to help explain stuff to those who will follow you. Okay. And so now what we do is for every arrow, for every choice that we want to have, we define an outcome. So let's say that our default outcome, let's start with our default outcome, and let's say that this is, our default outcome is account is industrial. And let's call this outcome, we're going to call this other outcome, account is retail consumer. And we might want to save it, but nah, it really kind of wants us to deal with this. So let's specify what are the conditions that have to be met in order for an account to be retail consumer. Well, we agreed that in a retail consumer account, they don't have an industry selected. So let's see if we can specify that in Flow. So let's say that if the cur industry that comes in is null, then, and it's true, this is how you structure it. You say, basically, if it is true that the cur industry is a null value, then we are going to decide that the account is a retail consumer. Else, we're just going to default to account as industrial. Let's place this here. So we're going to go straight from retrieving the industry to this decision. And then we're going to have these two paths. So one path is, and you know what I can do here, I'm going to hold down the shift button to shift multiple, select all three of these and move them over here. Okay, so this is path A. This is their retail, and we can send them emails. And path B is going to just be this one little message here, and then nothing happens. So now I can drag out, because I defined two outcomes, I can drag two connectors out, and it lets me choose. And there we have it. Okay, and once again we save as a new version. Now remember, saving it as a new version doesn't automatically activate it. If we go here and click send email to contacts, it is going to keep running the version 2 of this. So I want to test this out without taking version 2 out of production. So I'm going to take advantage of the ability to run and debug straight, right from the Flow Builder. So let's just click run first of all. Okay, well, the problem with just clicking run is that this particular flow, you'll recall, is designed to work based on a record ID, and that record ID depends on what page the button's clicked on. If we just run it from inside of Flow, we don't have a record ID. So it kind of just, it looks like it picked the default path. This is, so there's no obvious problems here, but we just don't know what's going on. So to get a better view of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the debugger. The debugger shows you every step of the way what data has been retrieved. It also has a really useful capability that lets you specify the inputs that you want it to start with. So in our case, we've got one input, the record ID. So I'm going to go over here to Money Market Bank, and I'm going to grab this record ID. And I'm going to say, okay, pretend that it was Money Market ID that launched this flow and passed in its record ID. And now go and run. And we're getting the result that we hoped for. If we do this with Money Market ID, you can see that it executed the default outcome. If we go back here, you'll remember that the default outcome is this account is industrial. So that's looking correct. Let's run it again. But this time, let's pass in the Boyle family. So we're grabbing its record ID and passing it in right here. And we're getting exactly what we hoped for. So we get a different message this time because it's detecting that Cur Industry is null, and as a result, emails are okay. We can click next and carry on, and notice that it runs the rest of the flow. We can go over here and we can see that sure enough a new one just showed up as we expected. You can see that the debugger produces a lot of information, and this can be very useful if you're running into a problem. This can be very useful because it's telling you what values, what outputs happened, etc. It shows you each loop of the state. So it looks a little scary. We haven't made it as pretty as we'd like to yet, but tremendously powerful and well worth spending a little time to get used to it. And that's all we'll do for this tutorial. So for this particular lesson, what you've seen is how you can take a flow, activate it, launch it from a button that you place on a record page, and then how you can create a record variable to catch the incoming record ID by going over here and making sure that it's titled record ID and that it's available for input. Very important. Otherwise, it's not going to show up and it's not going to get passed, and you're going to be wondering what the heck is going on. And then, based on that record ID, we load it in the account, where specifically we loaded in the industry field. We only grabbed that one field. We store that temporarily in our Cur Industry temporary storage variable. And then we had this decision, and we went into the decision and we defined our default, and then we defined the conditions that had to be true for it to be considered retail and consumer. And you can add other outcomes. For example, if we could have one for each industry type, we could have 20 different ones here, but we don't really need that for this, so we will save it, and I'm going to just save it as a final new version just to make sure I've got everything. So here's v4. The last thing I'm going to do is activate. So you can see that the current active version is way back here at version 2. So we're going to activate version 4. And so now, so we can go here and we can run it, and you can see that Salesforce picked up on the fact that it has a new version. And so this is getting the note that says no dice. But if we go over here to the Boyles, you can see that they're still getting the option to send the emails.